Before today's video, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest videos. If you want to see a case or topic covered by Paranormally Listed, then go to criminallylisted.com and fill out the questionnaire under the Suggest a Case tab. Number 3. Charles Peck. In the autumn of 2008, 49-year-old Charles Peck was a customer service agent for Delta at the Salt Lake City Airport in Utah. He had worked there for 19 years. Peck had 3 grown children. In September 2008, he was engaged to be married. He had proposed to his girlfriend, Andrea Katz, months earlier in February. Katz lived in Westlake Village, which is just outside Los Angeles, California. They decided to postpone getting married until Peck could move to the area. On September 12, 2008, Peck was in Los Angeles for a job interview at the Van Nuys Airport. Around 4:20 p.m., he was on a Metrolink commuter train. Tragically, the train's engineer, 46-year-old Robert M. Sanchez, was distracted by text messages on his phone and drove through a red signal. At 4:22 p.m., the train collided with the Union Pacific Railroad freight train. Andrea Katz was driving to the train station to pick up Peck when she heard about the accident on the radio. Katz called her family and Peck's family in the area, and they all rushed to the train station. Charles Peck was missing. His family was hopeful because, over the next 11 hours, they got calls from his cell phone. His fiancée, stepmother, brother, sister, and son all received calls. In total, 35 calls were made. Every time they answered, all they heard was static. When they called him, it went directly to voicemail. The call stopped at 3:28 a.m. Emergency responders traced the phone signal, leading them to Peck, who was in the first car. Sadly, 49-year-old Charles Peck was dead. The coroner determined that he died on impact. Peck's fiancée, Andrea Katz, said, quote, "We gave the rescuers a description, and they spent the next couple of hours looking for him. They ended up finding him, and they said he died immediately on impact, and there was no way he could have been calling us," unquote. In a bizarre twist, investigators never recovered Peck's phone. Many people believe the ghostly phone calls were Peck's way of helping responders find his remains. Besides Charles Peck, 24 people, including the engineer, were killed, and a further 135 people were injured. Number 2. Simma Lieberman. Simma Lieberman is an American workplace diversity consultant. Several decades ago, in the late 1960s, Lieberman was in love with a young man who was only identified as Johnny. Johnny was a kind spirit and beloved by everyone who met him. Lieberman described him as a mellow hippie. He was so easygoing that his friends called him a pushover. Lieberman and Johnny had purchased an apartment in the Bronx, New York, and they planned to marry. Lieberman was looking forward to their future together. One night, Lieberman was at her mother's home in the Bronx when she got a strange phone call from Johnny. She said that he sounded distant and rushed. There was also a lot of static on the line, so Lieberman was having trouble hearing him. She said she eventually heard him say, quote, "I love you," unquote. He then said, quote, "I just want you to know that I love you, and I'll never be mean to anybody again," unquote. The static increased, and then the line went dead. Lieberman tried calling back, but Johnny did not answer. Lieberman sensed that something was wrong. She later said that she couldn't feel his presence anymore. The next day, Lieberman received a phone call from Johnny's mother. She had some awful news. The night before, shortly before Lieberman received the strange phone call, Johnny had been murdered. He had been sitting in his car when someone shot him in the head. Lieberman was understandably shocked. She tried to think of a rational explanation for how she spoke to Johnny after he had been shot in the head. She thought that maybe after he was shot, he made it to a payphone, but she learned he had died seconds after he was shot. In 2011, Simma Lieberman told CNN, quote, "The whole thing was so bizarre, I could never understand it," unquote. Lieberman believes Johnny reached her at the moment of his death and said goodbye to her through the phone lines. Number 1. Dean Koontz. Dean Koontz is a best-selling author who was born in Everett, Pennsylvania in 1945. He has published 105 novels and sold over 450 million copies. Most of Dean's novels are suspense thrillers with horror, fantasy, and science fiction elements. In 1988, Koontz experienced something straight out of one of his books. On September 20th, Dean Koontz, who was 43, was working in his office when the phone rang. He picked up the phone and could hear a faraway female voice with an urgent message. She said, quote, "Please be careful," unquote. Dean asked the caller to identify herself, and she didn't. Instead, the caller repeated the warning 3 more times. Each time, she sounded more distant. After the 4th warning, Dean stayed on the line for a few more moments, and all he heard was silence. He thought the voice sounded like his mother, Florence, but that was impossible. His mother had been dead for nearly 20 years. Dean later said in an interview, quote, "A voice is much harder to remember than a face, so I thought I was being melodramatic," unquote. One possibility was that it was a prank call. After all, who would be better to pull this type of prank on than a best-selling author who wrote novels steeped in mysteries? But Dean didn't think this was possible because his number was unlisted. He went home and told his wife about the call. 2 days later, Dean visited his 81-year-old father, Ray Koontz, who lived in a retirement home. Dean had a strained relationship with his father. Ray was an abusive alcoholic. In an interview with CBS, Dean referred to his mother as a saint and his father as a sinner. Though Dean cared for his father, he never forgot his rough childhood. He said, quote, "When I write about sociopaths, I'm writing from the trenches," unquote. It didn't seem that Ray softened with age. In the retirement home, he was violent with staff and other patients. When Dean came to visit that day, the staff told him Ray had punched another patient who required a walker. Little did anyone know, but Ray had used his allowance to purchase a yellow-handed fishing knife. He had sharpened the blade and oiled the handle so he could use the knife like a switchblade. When Dean entered his father's room, his father pulled out the knife and attacked him. Dean wrestled the knife away from Ray and avoided being injured. Many people witnessed the event and one called the police. Dean left the room with the knife as the police arrived on scene. However, they thought he was the attacker and they drew their weapons on him. Dean said, quote, "All of a sudden I realized they were going to shoot me if I didn't drop the knife. They thought I was the perpetrator, so I dropped it and obeyed them. That was one of the worst moments of my life. My own stupidity almost got me killed," unquote. The police ultimately realized that Ray was the aggressor, and they subdued him. He was ultimately sent to a psychiatric ward for observation. Ray Koontz died 2 years later, in 1990, of degenerative alcohol syndrome. No one attended his funeral. Dean believes the mysterious phone call saved his life. He claims the call made him more vigilant, though he's unsure if it was from beyond the grave. Dean said, quote, "It was such a strange call. I don't claim that was a ghost. I don't know what I believe. It certainly was odd. People report these kind of events all the time, and it's always struck me as interesting that everyone seems to have had an experience or two of the uncanny. Sometimes I believe that call was from my mother, and sometimes it was a very strange, serendipitous wrong number. I think you always have to keep some skepticism about things like this, but it's comforting to think that there may be a realm where the personality survives. Dean Koontz has never received another phone call like that one again. He used the bizarre incident as inspiration for his essay, Beautiful Death. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.